Hello everyone, I'm Michael with TOAMagic.com, and the purpose of this channel is to go through pre-order pricing and take a look at how we figure out what we're pricing things at, what the factors are, and just our general approach. So we're going to jump right into Core Set 2021, the next Magic expansion, coming out on July 7th of this year. So first, some general guidelines on how we're approaching pre-orders. First off, new cards have a decent amount of uncertainty. The prices are generally much higher than they are when the set releases. There's also a limited number of vendors that are pre-ordering cards, so there's less competition in the market immediately, which means that the cards are just going to stay at a higher price longer. Second, it's harder to analyze new cards. So the safest thing to do is generally to sell them. It's very rare that we're going to decide to hold on to a new card, especially a more valuable new card that's above the $6 or $8 mark, because across the board, $6 and $8 pre-order cards are more likely to go down to $2 than up to $20. Third, the goal of our pre-order process is to keep all of these cards in stock on our website for as long as possible, with the goal of selling out on the Tuesday after the pre-release. That means 2 days before the set's released. We don't really want to be owning any of this stuff because that's how we're maximizing our value in the situation. Fourth, we can get regular, borderless, and showcase cards all in draft boosters. So the regular card is going to appear with the normal rare mythic value. In this case, 1 out of every 121 packs for a mythic, 2 out of every 121 packs for a rare. The borderless and showcase cards from experience appear at about half that ratio. WotC has said that 1 in 15 draft boosters will have a showcase or borderless card, but looking back at Ikoria and the past couple sets, we've seen that it's been about 50% reduction compared to the other version. Finally, today we're just talking about the underlying logic. We're getting some cards online, so the future videos are going to be spending a lot more time talking about how we adapt to the market and how we move. Remember, we're playing with a live market here. When this video is live, we're already going to have these cards online. We're going to be selling some, maybe not selling some, and we're going to be able to look at that data and adapt accordingly. So the first card we're going to talk about today is Bane Slayer Angel. This is a reprinted card. It was in Magic 2010, Magic 2011, and From the Vault Angels. So when this card initially came out, it was the Chase Mythic of Magic 2010. It started off at about $25 or $30. It very quickly became a $60 card. It was the most expensive card in that format until Jason the Mind Sculptor eclipsed it the following summer. We're not in that world anymore, though. And that's kind of the big takeaway from this. The card's pre-ordering right now at about $7. But I don't really expect it to stay there. We're going to be trying to sell this very aggressively. To take a look at why that's the case, let's jump into what that format looked like. So in that format, Jund was by far the best deck. And we have a deck list here that we're going to take a look at. Jund, black, red, green, playing Bloodbraid Elf. Also is playing cards like Putrid Leech, Sprouting Thrynax, Master of the Wild Hunt, Brewmate Dragon, and Garruk Wildspeaker. So if you think about how Bane Slayer Angel as a card matches up against something like Brewmate Dragon, it's pretty good, right? You have flying, first strike, and lifelink. So if your opponent has a Brewmate Dragon and you have Bane Slayer Angel, you're attacking for 5, gaining 5 life every turn. They can swing back for 8, but you're going to win that race in 4 turns. Also, Bane Slayer matches up well because it costs 1 less mana, and its size is just generally very hard for a Jund deck like this to deal with. This Jund deck has 3 Maelstrom Pulses and 2 Terminates that are able to eliminate a Resolve Bloodbraid Elf, but beyond that, would have to go through a lot of effort to try and clear a resolved Bane Slayer Angel off the board. If you look at modern design philosophy, though, you're seeing cards like Uro, where the card comes down, has an immediate effect, and then goes away. Modern cards are just much more resilient to Doomblade because of the increased amount of Enter the Battlefield triggers, and particularly good Enter the Battlefield triggers, which really comes down to Bane Slayer Angel is not as good as it once was. If you want an example of this in practice, well, it may surprise you, but Bane Slayer Angel just rotated out standard about 9 months ago, and that card is Lyra Dumbbringer. So Lyra Dumbbringer is a 5/5, flying for a strike lifelink, almost exactly the same as Bane Slayer Angel, just a couple keyword tweaks that don't really come up all that much. And you can look at the amount of play Lyra saw, the type of play Lyra saw. Lyra as a card did not see a ton of play in that format. It didn't have a particularly high value. It ended up being about $15 at the peak, and then post-rotation ended up being below $5. So really what we can take away is that we're going to see this card as Lyra or Lyra Light, depending how the format evolves. But the odds of this card breaking $20 at any point in the next 2 years is pretty low across the board. So now we're going to move on to our next card, which is Basri Ket. Basri Ket is a 3-mana Planeswalker. I'm going to be struggling a little bit on all of the new cards in general because figuring out the application is harder without really great historical context. That said, we do know that the format is looking to be an aggro versus ramp kind of format. The ramp strategies are very powerful, so 3-mana Planeswalkers that synergize in that are generally very good. That said, the card is already at $13. It's probably going to be staying in that range. We're going to be pricing the regular at $13.39, the borderless at $24.99, and the showcase at $22.99. Those are kind of in line with Throne Theros and Ikoria art variants, where there really is not that much of a premium on these cards, and a lot of it comes down to vendors just not pre-ordering them. So we're trying to take very aggressive stances because we'd rather sell a playset at $25 than not sell any at $35. Chandra Heart of Fire is a 5-mana red Planeswalker. It's an expensive red Planeswalker. And if we've learned one thing about expensive red Planeswalkers in the past couple years, it's that they always underperform. It's the nature of red decks and the nature of card selection that you're going to have 1 or 2 very good red Planeswalkers, but you're not going to be playing a diverse suite of high-end creatures like you would in some other formats. This would actually be pretty good if Fires of Invention was still in the format. The +1 synergizes extremely well with Fires, where you're able to restock your hand with 3 new cards every turn and cast 2 of them, but Fires is obviously banned at this point. It also competes with Nissa in Timur red-blue-green strategies, and I think Nissa's generally going to be much better for what those decks want to do right now. The 2 damage doesn't line up particularly well to eliminate any creatures in this format, so we're going to be pricing this card to sell. There's not a TCG play listing on the non-foil yet, but it's likely going to be in that similar $12 or $13 range as Basri. We have our first commander card of the list, Chromatic Ori. 7 mana, tap, add 5 colorless to your mana pool. This card is really good. There's definitely going to be people who want this, definitely playable. But how are we trying to figure out a value for this? Well, it's currently pre-selling at about $18, and we can take a look and figure out if that seems fair or not. Now, 7 mana in Commander is still a lot. Commander is perceived as a very slow format. That's not really the case, and playing a card that generates 5 mana when you already have 7 on board, less relevant than you think. However, we can take a look at Paradox Engine. Paradox Engine is a 5 mana artifact. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell and tap all your permanents, and it's generally a similar amount of play in Commander overall as I would expect this card to. So Paradox Engine peaked at $40 on July 1st, 2019, 6 days before its ban, but it pre-sold at $17. One of the other notes about Chromatic Ori is anybody who's buying Chromatic Ori is likely buying other cards. So that's going to be a factor, less so on an expensive card, more so on a cheaper card for how we want to handle pricing. In this case, the sellers on TCG are all very close in price at $17.35 is where we're going to end up pricing this. Elder Gargaroth has a lot of words on it. This is kind of in line with like a questing beast type card, where clearly it does a lot. Clearly it's going to slide into some green mid-range type strategies. But that kind of just tells you what the price of this card's going to be. It's going to be in about that same range. We're going to choose to sell it. We're going to price it at $13.75. Let's talk about Groom Tutor. This is the card that made me want to make this video. It opened at $50. It's now down to $40. That's still pretty high. Imagine if Starter never existed and we just had this card that was 1BB, sorcery, search your library for a card, put it in your hand, lose 3 life. How would we be talking about that card? What sorts of things would competitive players be saying about this card? Well, in general, tutors don't see competitive play, especially generic tutors like this. Obviously, a card like Trinket Mage or Treasure Mage or a Stoneforge Mystic, yeah, those cards see play because they have other things that make them viable. But most competitive decks don't really want the sort of redundancy at the sort of trade-off of 3 mana and 3 life that Groom Tutor is going to be providing. We can look at Vampiric Tutor for Necropotence as a notable example of a tutor seeing a lot of play. We can look at Mastermind's Acquisition from a short while ago. That card saw play, but that saw play in a fairly slow format in a 3-colored control deck, and also lets you get cards out of your sideboard, so it solved a lot of other problems in that format for those decks, including Unmoored Ego targeting your Teferi, where it became hard to win the game if you didn't have another out. So being able to play Mastermind's Acquisition certainly makes sense. This card is likely going to be good with Fires of Invention, and that may become a reasonable deck in Pioneer. I would not be terribly surprised if that's the case. But the big question is, will this see play in Commander? We can take a look at some data about that, and we can compare it to Imperial Seal. So Imperial Seal is a sorcery speed Vampiric Tutor. Search your library for a card, put it on top, you lose 2 life. It was printed in Portal 3 Kingdoms, but it was also reprinted as a Judge promo. This Judge promo came out fairly recently, in 2017, and we can take a look at our actual sales data of this card when we had them in stock. We initially were selling them for $135. We sold one about every 3 or 4 days. So this really goes to show the price sensitivity of Commander players, especially on moderately expensive cards, even when they become affordable. People were not jumping out to get Imperial Seal, even though it was the cheapest the card would likely ever be if this was something they ever wanted to play in their decks. So let's look at how this card actually plays. And we can take a look at tutors in general on EDHREC. So Demonic Tutor is definitely the gold standard of tutor. It sees play in 30% of the decks and does everything you want. Demonic Tutor continues to maintain a high price despite numerous reprints because of the quality of the card. This is definitely the gold standard. There's no real penalty to play it. And 2 mana is obviously very different from 3. Being able to Demonic for a Soul Ring, play a Soul Ring the next turn, or the same turn, that kind of puts you break even on mana, puts you ahead later on. It lines up very well with kind of how a Commander player wants to be playing Commander in general. Now we can look at Vampiric Tutor. Vampiric Tutor used to be in the $40 range, $50 range, and now it's in the $100 range. Vampiric Tutor is in 17% of the decks, which with color restriction, still a lot of decks, but not all of them. And we're kind of seeing diminishing returns on tutors. If Vampiric Tutor is the second best tutor in the game for Commander, but half of decks that could be playing Demonic are choosing not to play Vampiric, that's kind of telling for what we're going to be seeing on this long term. So if we keep going down the line to Imperial Seal, remember Vampiric Tutor was $40 or $50, Imperial Seal was $130 at the same point in time. So it's not a massive gulf between those two prices. And you would have expected serious competitive Commander players to have picked up an Imperial Seal at some point, or been able to put it in their decks. But Imperial Seal is just in 3% of decks. 3% is kind of the threshold for a good casual Commander type card that certainly sees play, but is not a multi-format staple, is not going to be able to command this sort of price tag in the 6 month to 2 year time frame that we're really dealing with this stuff. We can also look at just Groom Tutor itself. It's in 2,000 decks, 1% of the decks overall. And Groom Tutor Imperial Seal, right? Those cards are basically the same price in recent history, right? They're about $200. They stayed at about $200 for about 2 years, most of 2018, most of 2019. Anybody that would buy an Imperial Seal could have also bought a Groom Tutor instead, but decided Imperial Seal is much better. So the conclusion I'm drawing here is that Groom Tutor is just not particularly good in Commander and doesn't really do what Commander wants to be doing, which means that there's no real clear slot into Commander decks for a card like this. It's definitely possible. There's definitely people who are going to pick one up for Commander, but this is not the sort of, oh, I'm going to buy 6 of them for all my Commander decks because this card slots right in, like Chromatic Ori will. Instead, Groom Tutor is kind of just a filler card in a lot of decks. Supply is definitely higher than demand. We're going at $38.99 on the regular, $99.99 on the alternate art. And again, I would not be surprised if those continue to go down, but in a couple days we'll see how our sales are and see what changes we want to make. Liliana Walker the Dead, 4 mana black mythic here. This is a generic good mythic. It's a powerful card. We can definitely tell that. There's some possible uses with Davriel from War of the Spark for a rack style discard deck. Blue-black can use the new Anticipate to mill off some cards from the deck and make them -3, give -3, -3, -4, -4 to a creature when Liliana comes down in turn 4. I won't be surprised if this saw play. But again, if you start to look at what cards break that $12 or $15 mark, they need to be really good in Standard to do so and be in the best decks, which means that Liliana is almost definitely correct to just sell. We're at $12.85 for the regular, $29.99 for the borderless. Mangara the Diplomat, 2/4 lifelinker for 4. There are a couple cards in the set that deal with second spell or drawing a second card. It's possible it's going to be doing some cool things there. But a 4 mana 2/4 lifelink doesn't strike me as a 4 of in any deck. It doesn't really solve problems in a lot of decks. It's possible that a white deck can play this to shore up with the mono red matchup. That doesn't mean they're going to be playing 4, they're going to be playing the sideboard. This card being at $15 strikes me as much higher than the others. We're going to be going a little bit on the aggressive side, pricing it at $14.95. And I wouldn't be surprised if we end up selling this at $11 or $12. Massacre Worm is the next card that we're going to talk about. It's a small set mythic with relatively low supply. Originally printed in Mirrored and Besieged, has not been printed since then. We sold 74 copies last year at about the $20 mark, which means there's definitely demand. Most Mirrored and Besieged mythics we sold between 50 and 100 copies of. So that's not a particularly crazy scope or number, meaning that this card doesn't really have a supply issue like some other cards do. There's definitely liquidity in the market. Anybody who wants this is going to be able to get it. But at the same time, this is a reprint of a card with a very unique effect that oftentimes is going to raise the profile of this card. People are going to see it for the first time and possibly be adding it to decks they never would have imagined because they didn't realize the card existed. So there's definitely some commander upside, but there's definitely not a lot of standard play in this card. This card is going to be played as a 1 or 2 of at most. I would expect almost every deck playing it to play no more than 2. I'd expect it to end in the $6 or $7 range at the end of the year. That's based on where this card was last time in Standard, where commander cards like this typically fall. Looking back at generic role players over the past couple years, it's 3% of decks on EDH Rec. Makes it a role player, but not the best card in the set, not something that everybody's going to be playing. We're at $12.65 on the regular, $24.69 on the alternate art. Next we have Teferi, Master of Time. This card has a million versions. We're not pre-selling any of them. The chance of us overselling in this card is pretty high. The variance is going to be pretty severe, even though WotC tries to minimize that across boxes. And it's usually not a big problem, but 4 showcase and 4 regular versions makes it pretty tough. My one word of caution on this card for everybody is I would expect a rules change that's going to impact how often you can activate Planeswalker abilities. I don't think you're going to be able to play Teferi's +1 on everyone's turn. It's definitely possible, but it breaks the mold a little bit more than I think WotC would want. Being able to activate abilities on other players' turns is very cool design space that, in general, WotC chooses to embrace increasing the design space rather than decreasing it with a card like this. The last mythic that we have spoiled for today is Ugin the Spirit Dragon. This is at $28 right now. The old version was about $50 before all this, and about $40 going back 3 months. Seeing some amount of play in Modern, but not a ton. First question here is, do we have a standard format where decks want to go over the top of each other? This is the top end threat that other decks are going to have a hard time answering, and an 8 mana Planeswalker that clears up the board is definitely the top end that decks are going to be wanting to see. I would expect this to see a lot of standard play. EDH Rec has this at the 3% level. As we've seen before, 3% is the solid role player number this card sees play, but definitely not Format All-Star. You're not going to see a ton of decks jumping to add it for Commander, so that's also going to be holding back the price a little bit because the card is at $30. It's not too far off from where it used to be, and I think we're largely looking at this card being standard. It is 8 mana. I don't expect an 8 mana card to be a 4 of in basically any format, so we're probably going to be seeing 2 copies in standard decks. This $30 mark is in line with last standard. I think this card is probably about 20% too high right now. So again, we're going to be aggressive on it, and we're going to see where it goes. $27.79 on the regular, $64.75 on the borderless, $69.89 on the showcase. So that concludes everything from Monday and Tuesday of this week for Mythic Rares. We are going to be seeing, I'm going to have another video covering the rares at some point fairly soon, as well as commons and uncommons. And once we have all this up, we're going to be able to start seeing the result of our pre-orders, seeing what people are buying, and more importantly, seeing what they're not buying to make changes from here. So thank you everyone for watching. Please go ahead and give me a follow on Twitter at TOAMichael. Ask questions in the comments, give me feedback, let me know how I can make this type of content compelling and interesting for you all to watch. Thank you for watching.